Have we saved the best for last?
How about, does that work better? Awesome. Can everybody see the presentation? Questions on manufacturing? Yes, Bruce, we actually did save the best for last. The production, scheduling, engineering, those three topics had over 50 inquiries. So that's why I'm like, hey, you want to help with this one? There's a boatload here. And it was just outstanding how many people put on their surveys in November questions regarding those three areas of Epicor.
Yeah, no, it's actually kind of fun to go through those questions that you sent me and just saying, okay, what I put together along with Calvin is just sort of some quick answers and then screenshots so that we can talk through it. I'll flip through. Let's see. Thought I was sharing my screen.
Can I still have the presentation up on mine? Are you able to see?
I changed the presentation. Can I share my screen instead of your?
Yep.
I can flip.
And are you sharing your screen yet? I still got your.
I'm looking for where I'm sharing it.
On your go-to panel, there should be a little square on the tab that pops out on the left-hand side. Microphone, video, and then share screen.
Okay, there we go. Okay, perfect. So we're going to answer some things. So one of the first questions was that I saw was just manufacturing for the newbie or the beginner. So we thought we could just walk through a quick flow chart of how a job gets created, what a job does, and then also how we close them. I'm going to go into the next slide, which really kind of gives you a build up. So when you think about manufacturing 101, you might have a demand over here. And so I'm just showing a simple demand. And on this demand, this is for a stock part. And it's just saying we need 50. And what happens is, well, we've got 25 in stock. So it says then, because we have a demand of 50, it's going to make 25. So the job suggestion is going to be for 25. Now, if we have something similar, but this time there's safety stock involved. Now, when we have stock of 25 in here and a safety quantity, it doesn't want to slip down below that 25 number. So it's going to drive a demand to build 50. So it doesn't want to lose those 25 for quick fulfillments. And there are the what if type situation. The other demand that you can end up with is when you look at this next one is you have a non-stock MRP part. Now, a non-stock, and just to clarify, we're not talking non-quantity bearing, we're talking non-stock. So we get a demand from a sales order saying we need 50 of these. It's saying produce 50, but it's not going into inventory. It's going right to that demand. So even if I had some in stock, if it's a non-stock request, it's going to ignore what's ever in inventory and build it. Now, the real question is, and I like Calvin, the edit that you did here, Mommy, where do jobs come from? And one of the first places, you've got the model resources and procurement with where it is pulling that demand and it creates the jobs based on the methods that are in engineering Or at times, if you've got to make to order, it's going to pull it right from the quote. And that works really well for a lot of companies that are doing make to order type things. Another place, if you don't have MRP, you might have the planning workbench. And I want to bring up too is that even if you have MRP, if you're not looking at your planning workbench, you're missing something, because it's going to show jobs that don't get created by MRP. Granted, this never happens to anyone, but if you happen to have an engineer that checked out a revision and they didn't check it back in or approved it, that demand's going to end up without a job, and you'll have to figure out how to make it. So that's where the planning workbench comes in really handy. It also tells you if you should change that job. Another place is job manager, and I'll admit, in the first 5 years of work with Epicor, I really didn't look too much at the job managers, but job manager is really a slick process, because you can look at all the links. One of the things that I've got one customer that I worked with that they had a lot of jobs making the same part, and I was able to show them how they can consolidate that into one job very easily, so that you can leverage your resources and combine all of those into one job. And then the last one that a lot of people miss out on is what's called quick job entry. Now, quick job entry, and I'll say it's been around for a long time, but within the job entry screen, if you wanted to use that, you could just go into actions and click on quick job entry. You put in the part number, push go, push OK, more or less, and it will go get details. It creates a demand link to create to stock. It schedules the job, releases it. It does everything. So if you're one of those that say new job, get details, do all of this mouse clicks, definitely check out quick job entry. That's going to help you.
That works out really well also with the production planners workbench. If you see that you have a shortage on something and it's not an MRP part, or it's not a part you standardly monitor, quick job entry comes in really handy, because yeah, literally it's part number, revision, and quantity, and then it makes the job for you.
Yeah, and actually you bring up a good point. I've even seen this where instead of doing a Kanban receipt, if you want to have a job created by somebody out on the floor, this is where you don't need a planner. You can just say, go up to quick job, create it, and now they've got that traveler that can go through the shop. Now, what is a job? Now, this is really getting into the nuts and bolts of it, really, because really a job is just this big funnel, or sometimes I'll call it a bucket. And it's just to collect costs. So it's collecting the cost of labor and burden, the subcontracting, the material. It's all going into this funnel. And when you deliver it, you're going to deliver it as finished goods or finished assemblies, and that might be going into stock, or that could be going to a sales order. Here's the key. Epicor works really well is that if you deliver it as the whole batch or the whole part of the job, if you create these jobs, and I've seen where people will create a job for 100 parts, and then every week they pull 10 parts off of that job. Take a look at how your finances are running, because you may be surprised on the cost of those parts that are going into inventory or going into a sales order. I'll say is that this is one area that whenever you're doing transactions like that, test and retest to see what it's doing. The other one, we had an earlier session where we talked about manufacturing variance. The late costs. If you've taken this bucket and you dumped it, took the job and dumped it into inventory, and then put it upright again, and somebody puts more cost into it, where's it going to go? It doesn't know anywhere to go but to manufacturing variance. Here's a little secret though, is on make to order, the manufacturing variance can end up going directly to cost. If you haven't closed the job is still open. It will keep flowing to the cost of sales and actually update the sales gross margin report, even though that invoice has been posted. So that's a tip on when you are doing make to order. Again, do some testing, but best practice is get all of your labor and all of your materials into the job before you ship it, or definitely before you put it into inventory.
You do know you're taking all of the fun out of forensic accounting there, Bruce.
I know. I know you. Well, in fact, I was going to tell you that was a good presentation on the periodic posting. Again, one of my favorites. I taught Karen well. She's doing a good job on that. It's been for me too. 15 years on doing periodic postings and doing it in 9. It's a whole lot easier now in 10. It's amazing what you can do with that. Completing the job, it shouldn't be a mystery, and this is where really good business practice I've seen, where you have the person that's doing the receipt to inventory actually also is the one that's completing the job. So they look at the complete job and they make sure that all the costs are in there before they say job receipt to stock. One checkbox that you want to be really careful with is auto receipt to stock. It's the last operation. You think this is going to make it real easy. Well, again, the problem with that is that if you didn't receive all the material or subcontracting costs to that job, now you are going to keep that forensic analyst employed. It does, when you complete it, it takes the job off the resource load, the shop load. It also drops all the material requirements, so that's a good thing. And then the final piece, which a lot of times is finances, those are the ones that are closing that job. And then you can't receive or do anything to that job unless you open it up. And I should point out too, is take a look at autocomplete and auto closing. Those are some things that you can set up. And when you think about auto completing, you're thinking, well, it's just going to complete the job. No, you can set parameters. So it says you need to have X percent or within $5 or $10 of the cost before it would complete it. So you can set things up so it will do job completing for you automatically. It's a nice trick.
Yeah, the autocomplete and auto close, I kind of relate that to it's an automated process. If the job is within certain thresholds, like Bruce was saying, $5, or it's within 5%, let the system automatically complete and close and get those jobs off the books. Those aren't your problem children that you have to worry about. You want to see the problem children. Why did this job run 30% over estimate? How did this job run 50% under estimate? Those are the ones that you don't want to auto-complete or close. But having a person go through the 80% of your jobs and just mark complete, close, they're not even looking at the data. And when they stop looking at it, that's when the errors are going to happen. So if you can automate that 80-20 split and let the system close those so that the person that you have only needs to focus on the problem children.
Yeah, exactly.
And Diana's kind of got a question here about the costs applied to the job after the job is complete. I know we'll hit the Q&A session later, but it was right there on the screen with you. If the order is shipped, those additional costs will update the sales gross margin. Is that a version fix? Nope.
No, that's been around since 9. Probably
Oh, come
even
on, Bruce. You asked me yesterday when you were going to get to say that. It's working as designed, Diane.
working as designed. Yeah. Well, no, I'm coming up to one that says working as designed, which is not what we wanted to do. One that I got in here is just capable of a promise. I threw that in. I think somebody had asked about what is capable of promise, and this is really a slick tool within the sales order that it takes, and it will actually look at what's it going to take to build this and how quickly can we fulfill it, and it will create a job for you.
Yep, and it also looks at what your current capacity and loads are, so it's not overloading. This is a true value that it comes back with what's capable to promise.
And this is, and it's similar, the difference between this and available to promise just tells you what's going to happen or could happen, because they're showing you what's coming in, what's in stock and what's coming in. And but it's a nice engine to run. Now, some of this gets down to, at times, I think Calvin and I have a job which is check the box, know which box to check and what happens when you check these boxes. And I've laid out 3, and actually there's a 4th one which we'll touch on too, but company configuration, the site configuration, and site maintenance are some key things that do affect scheduling. So on company configuration, let's take a look at this one. We've got a couple areas. One is in the scheduling area. Now this is under that production tab. Global rescheduling started operations. So if you want to, somebody's halfway through that operation, you still want to move that into tomorrow's bucket so that you can stay on time and the schedule's telling you really what's going on. The next one is allow scheduling before today. There's 2 schools of thoughts, and I'm going to say both are right. It depends on your company, the industry. A lot of times I see it by saying going forward, you know what reality is, but if you go backwards, you know how urgent it is. So you have to decide what works best for you on that. Prompting to allow scheduling an unengineered job, and you think, why would I want to schedule an unengineered job? Without a schedule on the operations, your purchase order suggestions won't be seen, which is why you would want to schedule it. And now, again, it depends on the type of company that you are. You may not want to do it until it's ready to be engineered.
Or you may want to get those long lead items released to procurement. So then go ahead and schedule those on the unengineered job.
That's true. That's true. And now granted, the other, and we won't get into it, but there is also the planning contract that you could consider using, which is a slick feature that came out in I think it was 10.2 or 10.1 that allows you to buy something even before you have the job. You can do it back at the quote stage. The debug log, I haven't done much with the debug log. Have you done the scheduling debug?
Yep. These are the 2 settings I referenced in the logging a little later in the presentation. These are the 2 settings in company configuration. Enable scheduling debug log. You thought the MRP and the scheduling logs were long. When you enable this schedule debug log, they're going to get a whole lot longer because it's going to show you all the determinations of why it put a job where it did and when it put it on a resource. This next checkbox turns white after you turn the debug log on. Then you can say include extra details, and an already long log file is going to get a whole lot longer. So when you use these 2 settings in company configuration, use them very carefully. This will build some huge files, especially if you run MRP with scheduling turned on. Because if you have 200,000 jobs, all those operations on those jobs had to get scheduled, and all the decisions that were made by the scheduling logic are included in that extra details. This is normally only used for extreme debug, trying to figure out why something happened in the schedule.
So the other thing is that you want to relieve your load, and what that means is when you schedule the job and you put hours against this resource, and I've got 10 hours scheduled for it, how am I going to relieve that? Well, there's 3 different ways of doing it. It can look at the cost that you've estimated. Let's say you've got 10 hours at $20 an hour, so you got $200. So if I've taken off $100, now I've got only 5 hours left. The second way is that if I'm doing hours for those same 10 hours, I apply 4 hours of labor, I'm going to leave 6 hours load left. And then the last one is quantity. On that operation, I expect to make 1,000 parts, and I did 300. So now I'm going to take off, I'm going to leave 7 hours worth of labor or load on it. A site configuration. We're going to come back to this auto-complete setup. There's a really slick little bug. You know, Calvin's laughed when we talked about this the other night, and I'll leave it at that. Is that what that is that when I complete the operation, the setup is completed for you. Include completed quantities and send ahead calculations. On the send ahead calculations, Calvin, do you want to talk about that a little?
So when you use the send ahead in Epicor, this is kind of taking what the Epicor engine used to do for scheduling is operation 10 would have to be done. Then 20 would start. Then 30 would start. Then 40. And it was always the first operation had to finish before the next operation could start. Send ahead came into the picture and said, hey, when I get 100 pieces on this 1,000,000 piece run, those 100 pieces can go on to the next operation. I don't have to wait for operation 10 to finish. So it took job schedules from being 3 months down to, hey, I can actually do this in a week. Well, the scheduler in the days of old had to drag each of the operations on the scheduling board over to reflect what they were really doing on the plant floor because they were sending parts ahead. Epicor allows this now, but then do I include the hours or the quantity? And then how do I look at that? Is that a percentage? Do I send, when I get 25% of the order completed, I can send those parts on to the next operation? Or is it, hey, I want to send 10 pieces. Every time I get 10 pieces out of operation, the first stop, I want to send that to the second operation. Epicor takes that quantity, multiplies it by the production standard, and says, okay, this is how much time is needed, then I can start operation 20. So by including that completed quantity hours and hours in the send ahead calculation, you get a much more accurate send ahead forecast. Did I miss anything, Bruce?
No, that was, okay. That was good. Well, and it is similar to that other about how you relieve load too. It's somewhat related. The other point here is material dates and this is at the site level. So you might have 2 different sites that are going to operate differently. And this is the key thing when we're on site. We may want one where they will want to do it when it's only engineered. Others are, more long lead time items. They want to do it unengineered.
And I also had a customer in the past where we did manufactured items in one site. We used multi-site for repairs and overhauls, and we used a third site for R&D so that we keep the financials separate for each one and control how the jobs got scheduled because each one was handled differently. R&D jobs are completely different than repeat order jobs that are also different than, hey, I'm doing a repair and a fix to an object that came back in.
Right. So on the site maintenance, a lot of people, think, oh, I've got to always have to go to site configuration. Now also open up site maintenance. There's some pretty important parts in here. For instance, on this site, you can say that because of the really complex products, it takes a while to get that production preparation time put together, getting the job put together, the drawings, and then you have to pull together your kitting. So pulling your materials, you want to put some times in for that. The scheduling set ahead, and actually, do you include setup or do you just look at the production when you're doing that? Some of the scheduling constraints, you can just choose to ignore those or include those. The dynamic days of supply, Kelvin, on the dynamic days of supply in the lead time, how does that pull in?
I haven't used that one. I'm kind of drawing a blank on your screen print here. Or
Okay.
are you talking the dynamic days of supply on the part?
And yeah, it's in the lead time on
The part planning tab?
Yeah, it's on the part planning. Well, we'll be on that tab or on that screen in a minute here too.
Yep, haven't used this one.
Yeah, and even same with the minimum quantities. Some of these check boxes are rarely used. I think that's the hard part about it. When we are looking at the backward scheduling, when does that start, and how does that work for you too? It ties into your calendar when you're setting up your calendar, and actually we have a slide later that we're going to talk specifically about calendars. So let's take a look at the next section, which is our horizons. Now, this company, I'm surprised to see that it's set with a finite horizon of 365 days. Typically, we want to go with like 1 week or 2 weeks to start out with, and then slowly expand it out as we're working with it. And also looking at your overload, you want to look at what's getting overloaded just in the near term. You don't care about further out because things are going to change in July. You don't need to know what's going on with that. But you do want to see what's happening for your rough cut. That's looking out a little bit out further. So you've got your finite, your infinite, and then your rough cut horizon. When do you start that? This next one, I can only think of a few companies that would consider doing this, is that auto firm horizon. If you really want to mess with your planner, go in and just change that setting to 20 days. All of a sudden, you won't have any on-firm jobs because they firm up automatically. You won't have a very happy planner either. But if you know that within 5 days, anything within 5 days or 10 days, you definitely would want to just go ahead and firm it, and that's what you're doing. Just have the system do it for you.
Exactly. I'll have clients use that auto firm where they run a fixed 5-day for their plant, and then the day 6 through 10 the following week, they allow the system to auto firm. They know they're still going to work those jobs and reschedule them, but the first 5 days, they also lock that schedule. So then the auto firm is putting everything into the second week.
And on the on-firm horizon, that's going back, that's saying how far out you'll have on-firm jobs with MRP.
I normally set this to the long lead time.
Right.
Whatever the longest lead is your unfirm series. I don't need a job to go past my longest lead item.
Right, right. The scheduling direction, many companies do want to do backward scheduling, so you're looking at the due date and they backward schedule it instead of going forward. And the forced start times and forced end times, that really gets into how you can do start to start or finish to finish on your scheduling. When you're looking at at the schedule, the different operations, and that's where you can, within the site, set that so it's working like that.
And then that also feeds off of that start all jobs. I want to say it was in company or site config, where you can have all jobs start at a certain time. And then same thing in sales order entry, you can have a ship time.
Right.
And that will also feed into this.
Then this last one is pretty important, is that synchronizing the required by date with the demand links. If your sales order release is changing, if you're doing scheduling, and I'll say global scheduling, this takes out that requirement of, oh, I've got to run out and change all these required dates, because you're going to have the system do that for you. That's the whole idea. So then when sales is in messing with the required dates, you can have it change the ship by date, excuse me. It will reflect back on the job. And I think that's where, and I don't have a screenshot of it, but this is where it also gets really important to lock it down too. You don't want sales messing with your schedule. And so at a certain point, you want to lock those jobs in so they don't get rescheduled on you.
Yep, and that's where we'll recommend putting in a method directive to say, hey, if the product has a lead time days of 5, you can't change the ship by if it's between today plus 5 days. That's the cutoff window. You can't turn around and alter it because we've already got the plan running. It's already been released to the floor. We can't pull it out now.
Right. Now this next area we're talking about multi-job, and this is something that works out really well, is that when you are scheduling multi-jobs, this is when you're dealing with the job-to-job links. So instead of having a job with sub-assemblies on it, there's going to be times that you want to have this one job, but it's feeding maybe 3 other jobs, the same sub-assembly, but each one is getting painted a different color, for example. This way, when you're scheduling it, it's allowing you to do that scheduling the multi-job links, so that it is keeping all of that in sync as you both those successor jobs and predecessor jobs too. And it's saying if you're going to schedule the one, let's pull in the other jobs too when you're doing your scheduling. The minimize WIP, that can be good for you if you're the finance guy and you want to keep your WIP low. Let's minimize WIP. If you're the operations guy, you're going to uncheck this. And the reason is that many of you want to get the parts in-house so I can start building now. I don't want to say, I know they're going to come next Wednesday. I've got time today to go ahead and build. I'd rather build them today because you're going to get a snowstorm, for instance. It never happens, but it's going to snow in Houston, Texas, and we won't get the parts in. So this is where it's going to help. So again, you want to think about the choices you make on these check boxes. The leading or the manufacturing lead time calculations. I'll be honest with you. I haven't done a lot of work on that area. Calvin, could you make some comments?
I was going to ask you, do you have anybody that uses it successfully? I don't have one customer that uses it successfully. It'll give them a swagger for the manufacturing lead time, but I find most people either ignore it completely or set them manually and click the override button.
Yeah. So this is the PartPlant tab, better known as the PartSite tab now in E10 language, or the planning tab in the part. Now I'm going to focus in on this one. This is where you can set at the specific site. So you can have different planners for each site. And actually, Calvin, you wanted to make some comments on these time fences?
The time fences and the reschedule in and out is going to be, when do I move this forward? If the date on the order changes by 2 days, the customer wants it pushed out 2 days. Well, if my reschedule out is set at 5, Epicor is not going to reschedule. It's going to say, go ahead and make that job. It's only when the date change alters outside of this area that Epicor is going to actually act on it. It's going to say, hey, no, I'm not going to do all that noise and move this job up 2 days, this one out 1 day. There's got to be a threshold at which we say, hey, I'm allowed to have the inventory on the floor for 3 days before I have to rework the whole job schedule to accommodate a customer that wants to push out 3 days. It's just a way to cut down the noise and the suggestion that MRP is going to create all these suggestions and say, hey, expedite this job, postpone this one, move this up. I don't want to handle all that. I want my planner to be able to focus on the issues rather than just do all the minutia to keep Epicor happy. So this is where I'll turn around and recommend you use these settings. And I believe this was also on the part class, or was it the product group had the site tab on it?
This is on the product group tab. You can set some defaults for the product group for it. Yeah, you're right. And same with the planner. You can have the planner set, so you don't need to set it at the part.
Yep. So then I can turn around and say all the parts in this product group follow this rule, and I don't have to manage them one by one. With the advent of the DMT, I find a lot more people in updatable BAQs. They just allow people to go maintain them one by one now.
Yeah, that's true. Now, when you get into these parts, some of these parts too, is you think about a box holds 25, so let's build 25 at a time for your lot sizing. But at the same time, I'm not going to start this machine up unless I'm going to build 250. So that's your minimum lot size for the start. And I don't want to build up 2,000 either. So that's going to be, what's the largest job that I want to put on the floor? I'm going to say probably this next field is one of the most critical fields in supply chain management, days of supply. Days of supply is huge because it consolidates your demands into one bucket. And what I'm saying that is that if you've got, and this is also as long as you're pulling from inventory, if you're buying direct to the job, it doesn't impact it. But if you're pulling inventory into a job and you've got multiple jobs that are going to be pulling that, and this part, you're willing to just go ahead and buy 30 days worth of it. Set, again, this is based on calendar, so you would probably set 20 days would be 1 month's worth. And that's going to consolidate it so you get one shipment, one shipping fee, and that's why you want to consolidate it.
And how many suggestions do you get? 1 per day? Make 10 parts on Monday, 10 parts on Tuesday, or do I just make one job for all of them?
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, because you would get like a PO suggestion. I would say, here's 20 releases for each day, and instead of just one. So it's helping your suppliers too. Now you could have a short horizon planning so that if it's within 20 days, you might be willing to say, oh, I only want 5-day buckets instead of 20-day buckets because you're getting this demand later on. And same with the lot size. I'm willing to do a smaller lot size in a shorter period of time. This is, we mentioned it before, that production prep buffer, the kit time and the receive time. A lot of times that receive time is helpful because it takes 1 day or 2 days. After it's done, you might have some things off the job that really don't need to be on the job. Maybe you got degreasing going on, or they're wrapping it up and bagging it and putting it in a box and you don't have that as part of the job. That might be your receive time, or it's even moving between your production building to your stock room. Here's that lead time that both Calvin and I were talking about as far as how many are really using it. And How do you pull it in?
I'll say most people, if they do use it, they'll go to the manual and set the values manually on the right. And then it tracks when it was last set and who entered it.
So we're gonna switch gears and talk a little bit about, what did you call it? What's MRP?
Muddle resources and procurement.
Okay.
Make a mess of my shop.
And always the big question is regenerative versus net change. And I've worked with a lot of different companies, and the approach that I've always taken, if you're a small shop and if you can do it, just run regen. If a regen finishes in the time that you've allocated for it, if it's overnight and it works, just do it, because what regen does, it does regenerate and look at all of the demands, and it just works. The net change I've seen done where you run it during the day, you might run it and it runs really quickly. Or you want to do spot type MRPs where you can hit that filter and put in a different part or part class or product group to just run a group of parts to see what's going on. I think that's really key.
Yeah, the net change, I'll find people, they load their EDI orders in the morning, and then just before lunch, they want to kick off MRP to make sure that, okay, all the new orders that just came in got processed and got handled. But it's generally after a bulk process that they run the net change.
Mm-hmm. Now, Calvin, is this a trick question that you put in here? Because you have cutoff date, but on the screen it's checked with a dynamic saying today.
Well, I'll see some people that turn around and play with the cutoff date, and I generally turn around and say, just do it as of today. So that's why I'm like, I generally recommend just put your cutoff in there to be today and just use the dynamic. If you want to schedule MRP to run on a fixed, this is an easier way to use the dynamic. If you put a hard date in there, then when you go to schedule it, that date doesn't dynamically move with you. And that's the same with the schedule start.
Because I've looked at it as cutoff date is more that I want to go out from today. I want to go out like 3 months. So I'll say month plus 3 months, or end of month to plus 3 months or 10 months or something. And then schedule start date, I want to start today. That way it's looking forward on it.
Yep.
And the log file, which both you and I are familiar with, is do the log file if you're having problems. But if you're not having problems with MRP, turn off the log file, because now you don't need to gather what the issues might be. As long as if it's running fine. If you are having problems, then you turn on the log file for that overnight run.
I have a couple of clients where we generate the MRP log file, and then we have a process that reads the text file for any word error and pulls that out. So all of the errors that occurred during the MRP run get focused and pulled out and then sent over to the production people. So we'll turn around and run it. And this is where I made that note in the company config about MRP and scheduling. If you run that scheduling log, those other two checkboxes in the company config are going to impact, do I include the additional details? And then am I going super verbose with them to include all the info?
I'm going to watch on time. We've got about 5 minutes or so I don't want to spend too much time. Some of the key checkboxes that you probably would want to watch for is that historical dates, if you want to have that or not, going back into time. If I jump down here, recycling the
MRP jobs,
that does help speed it up. It will change the start and stop dates, but at least now it's not going to get details for that job. On a make-to-order shop, if you're putting details on your quotes, this is where you can say get details from quotes, especially on those non part on the fly parts. where you will have to pull it from the quote. And running the multi-level pegging, I've gone in there, I don't know about you, Kevin, but when I've gone in there, yeah, I figured it out. But in most cases, you're not drilling in and looking at that pegging process. I don't think many companies, but that's more overhead on your MRP run.
Yep.
Down at the bottom, I see if you get the same numbers that I've done is I try to do three gerbils in 3 cages to run to get the most horsepower out of the system.
Now, if you're an Epicor Cloud customer, go ahead and set those to 20 and 20 and watch them scramble.
Yeah. Yes.
Try to keep it fairly simple. 3 is how many CPUs and how many processes to run at the same time. Depending on how many CPUs are on your service. For the on-prem customers, you know how many CPUs are on that server and how many you can allocate to this. For the cloud, they're not going to know that. So it's better to keep it 3 or less in the cloud.
Yeah. This is a a lot of people have always asked, what is this use part revision checkbox? What does that do for me or to me? In fact, I've spent some time on, and I've got a longer litany on that. I'm not going to go into that. But the basics is by unchecking the box, the demand is based on the revision that's been requested. Translated, if I have a Rev A part and a Rev B part, and I'm just bringing out the Rev B part, a customer calls up saying, "Hey, I'm interested in your new revision." So you put in product Rev B, even though it's unapproved, it will drive a demand, and it will drive that demand to the planning workbench, and then I can create the new version for that customer. And later on in my run-out period, I can actually run A and B both approved. And so if the new customers say, I want the latest and greatest, you put in Rev B, it's going to create jobs for Rev B, and it will also create jobs for Rev A, as long as they're within that effective date. So it's on the most part, a lot of companies won't use that, but it's just something that works really well. You did these notes on the operation times.
Yeah, I was just throwing that in there so that people know the queue time occurs before the operator or the setup ever starts. The machine setup is done by the operator or the specialist that sets up the resource for that production order. The production time in this graph shows what's being done by the operator or the machine or the resource for it. The move time is what happens after production when the product's in motion, or how long it takes to get to the next operation. So I was just trying to clear what each one of the buckets meant up here in the diagram for you.
Yeah, and it does, yeah, it can impact that schedule, definitely. So here's my word to the wise: be careful what you check. Comes back to this autocomplete setup, and you think, hey, this is really slick. I've got this 8 hours on my setup, but a lot of times the guys are just going to log into production and put all their time on production. But I want to make sure that I take that 8 hours off the schedule when they finish it up. Well, Epicor helped solve that problem because they put the checkbox in here. So I had an estimate of 8 hours here, and when I check the box, it just takes 8 hours and drops it into that it took 8 hours in the actual job. And
when it didn't.
When it didn't. Yeah, the guys did the setup in 4 hours or 1 hour or whatever. And so when I'm going into the job tracker, I'm looking at this, or I run the production detail report, and I see this, that it was 8 hours in the setup time, where the actual setup time was 1 hour. It's like, what's going on? And so that's the word to the wise is, and I have put a case into Epicor saying, why would you change this? And the response is, it's working as designed. What is the problem? So that, you know, I know I've said it, we've said it a few times here, is that always check your work and test it and see what it's doing in your test environment. The other thing is that I've worked on some things in here, and this is just showing you what you're able to do. Is that here's the shop capacity versus load. The point is that currently there's something similar in Epicor in E10, pretty similar to what was in version 803. And the reason is because it is the same of what was in 803, because they're using the old technology. This is using the E10s, and Fred talked about it, the subqueries. You can do a lot of neat tricks with subqueries and advanced groupings to get this type of information. So it's something that is a challenge that you can talk. If you're not the one that creates dashboards, this is a dashboard that they could create. Or if you want, my name's at the bottom. You can contact me and we can talk.
Yeah, I want to say that shop capacity and load, that came out in like 5.0. And I want to say that was Cairo. It's been under the executive analysis for a long time.
Yeah. Okay. And in this point, somebody had a question about manipulating the capacity planning without getting efficiencies on it, and really that sort of somewhat ties back into using calendars. If you expect that you're 80% efficient, you set your calendar to 6-hour days instead of 8-hour days.
Or you can alternately modify every production standard you enter on the operations to account for that efficiency. Generally, it's easier to do that on the production calendar rather than each operation being performed.
Right. Now, on the cumulative lead time, in fact, Calvin, I see you have a note here about the master production schedule.
We have a master production scheduling report at Codabears, but we can bypass beyond that. We're running behind topic here, and we don't need to advertise.
Let's see. It's really just to make sure that we can make parts work and having good part operations, making sure you don't have inactive resources, and test it.
Inactive resources, multiple approved revisions, no approved revisions. Okay. There's a lot of things, and this is kind of going back to, I know we've talked about in the past, but creating x-rays of your system that show you where people are making mistakes that are screwing up other areas of the software.
Right. Yeah. No, I've done an X-ray too, and where you look at how resources are set up. This one, somebody's asking about how we can work with MES on tablets, and that's the neat thing about Kinetics. And earlier you talked about it with Besleo too, and
yep. Hey, even had Besleo bezels on here.
Yeah.
The API calls are moving towards replacing that.
Okay. Let's see. With is there any other points we need to hit quick, or I'm going to flip through these? Stop me if I should.
Setting up the finite scheduling and the difference between, the only real place to do this is on the resource groups and the resources. Marking the resource group as a finite capacity, and then how far out does that finite schedule need to look at this, and then it turns the item back into an infinite, just throw the jobs at it.
Okay.
If you're only scheduling a finite schedule on your plant floor for 5 days, there's no sense in setting your horizon 30 days for a finite calendar.
Right. And then on setting up global, that definitely you want to do some testing on it, but it is pretty straightforward after you set it up and run it. I think I'm going to flip through here. We talk a little bit about calendars, and I think this may be the last slide.
We talked about the adjusting the calendar for the efficiency that you're getting out of the shop floor. So if you're only getting 80% efficiency on an 8-hour day, put in a 6-hour day on your calendar. Someone had mentioned about wanting info about supplier calendars, and I generally recommend using supplier calendars for the foreign countries, not for the supplier. All the holidays in India are pretty much the same, so I can set up an India calendar, and any companies or vendors that I work with in India, I just attach to that calendar. Any suppliers from China, I'm going to put in the Chinese New Year. I'm going to put their holidays on that calendar so that when Epicor generates the purchasing suggestion, oh, you can't order it during the middle of New Year, so it's going to tell you to order it beforehand. And I have had customers turn around and ask to create customer shipping calendars. The customer's dock is only open on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we've used the production calendars and allowed them to be created, and then on the customer record to ship to, we pull down what calendar it is and use a BPM on the packing slip or the order ship by date to only allow it to go on one of the open days.
Right. So we
have a boatload of questions, which I don't think we're going to hit in 2 minutes.
Okay.
What we can do is go ahead, I'll send you a copy of all of them, but you have access to the question list there, Bruce, so if you want to go ahead and pull a copy. We can go ahead and answer people directly after the meeting. It's going to be a little hard to pull that up here during. Like I said, this topic was huge in November and had the most survey responses and questions regarding Epicor.
Yes, send me the list. I don't see the list here, but if you send me the list, I'd be happy to answer back to the people.
Yeah, I'll send all the unanswered questions out to both of you, and then just respond. I'll get them included in the minutes as well.
Okay, perfect.
That works perfect. We can get the answers back to you, Fred.